Now, the rest of the story. It happened one summer day, June 21, the American dream was dawning. The Continental Congress was in session in Independence Hall, Philadelphia. Present were the Patriots, James Madison and the rest, when suddenly their deliberation was interrupted. Soldiers were approaching Independence Hall. Our forefathers rushed to the windows and gazed out in disbelief. The approaching army was entirely unexpected. Therefore, Independence Hall was completely unprotected, utterly vulnerable. How many were there? 80, 100? No, more than that. Behind the infantry, 200 and 250. Hurry out the way back quickly. The soldiers were surrounding the building that hold everything. Nope, too late, no way out. Bar the doors. Now the Patriots were trapped inside Independence Hall. Maybe if they talked to the soldiers, surely they were not beyond reason. What glory could there possibly be in killing unarmed legislators? Somebody called out a window, "What do you want?" One of the soldiers called back. It was a ridiculous question, he answered. Supposedly the Patriots knew very well what the soldiers wanted. The legislators looked at each other bewildered. Again, Madison insisted, "What is it you want?" The soldiers raised their muskets. A voice from among them, "Independence Hall would be stormed presently if they, the soldiers, were not paid." Paid what? Paid the money which was owed them, now months overdue, their salary as soldiers in the Revolutionary Army. They were Continental soldiers, not redcoats. When they staged their dead-earnest assault on Independence Hall, June 21, 1783, the Revolutionary War was over. Angry over the withholding of their back pay, they had gotten drunk and mutinied. They just marched away from their commanding officers and off to Independence Hall. Gratefully, there was no gunfire, only gun-waving and verbal threats, and by evening the intoxicated detachment had dispersed. The cornered Continental Congress had dispatched a messenger to seek aid from the Pennsylvania militia. But for some reason or another, the militia refused to rescue them. Well, that made James Madison angry. And then Congress immediately voted to withdraw to Princeton, New Jersey, where local authorities had promised protection. But Madison and his fellow congressmen never forgot that history recalls our founding fathers. During the Constitutional Convention of 1787, moved to create a site in which to locate the national capital, a city completely removed from the authority of any state and under the exclusive jurisdiction of Congress. No state could be trusted to defend the seat of national power. No state could be trusted, the delegates demanded. James Madison, perhaps loudest of all. And, of course, that is why, as now you know, Washington, D.C. was born. Only now you know the rest.
And now, the rest of the story. You know, for many Americans, Washington, D.C., well, it's kind of confusing. What is it? If it's a district and not a state, what exactly does that mean? Well, let's dig a little deeper into the creation of Washington, D.C. In March 1781, the Continental Congress and the Supreme Executive Council of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania held their meetings at what was called the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. We now refer to that State House as Independence Hall. Continental Congress relied on state militias to enforce laws and keep order. These state militias were comprised of soldiers who were promised payment for their services. The problem was that Congress had little money to pay them. The colonists were fighting an expensive war with England, the most powerful nation on the planet at the time, a war that many thought the colonial soldiers could not win. The colonists needed military and financial assistance. In 1777, Founding Fathers Benjamin Franklin and Arthur Lee, diplomats in Paris, negotiated an alliance with France. Founding Father John Adams had been sent to France to join them, but he quickly concluded that the French were not helping as much as he thought they should. You see, French warships were sent not to the colonies to help fight the British Navy, but to the West Indies to protect their own interests there. John Adams said in a letter to Congress that the French meant to keep their hands above our chin to prevent us from drowning, but not to lift our heads out of the water. In 1780, John Adams went to the Dutch Republic, the Netherlands, to try to secure a loan so the colonies would not have to depend on France. In August 1780, he went to Amsterdam, but Dutch representatives refused to meet with him. There were two big problems. First, John Adams did not speak their language. He didn't speak Dutch, and they did not speak English, French, or any of the other languages that John Adams understood. But the second and most important problem was that the Dutch government had learned about American defeats at Charleston and Camden, as well as the betrayal of Benedict Arnold. But he was finally allowed a meeting with the Dutch representatives in April 1781. But the Dutch did not acknowledge the independence of the United States of America until April of 1782. After 2 long years, Dutch bankers finally agreed to John Adams' request for a loan. But agreeing to a loan and actually turning over the money, well, those were two different things. Then getting the funds back across the ocean took months. It was a slow process, too slow for many of the soldiers. On June 17, 1783, soldiers stationed in Philadelphia sent Congress a demand for the back payment that they were owed. The soldiers threatened that they would take action that same day unless they were paid. Many soldiers had deserted because of the problem of non-payment, but none had ever used violence against Congress to get their pay. Congress assumed they were bluffing and ignored the demand. The members of Congress must have felt vindicated when nothing happened on that day. Nothing happened the following day either. On June 19th, Congress learned that about 80 soldiers had left their post at Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now that's about 60 miles west of Philadelphia. And they had joined the nearly 500 soldiers at the Pennsylvania City Barracks. Now these soldiers had control of the weapons and ammunition in the city. On the morning of June the 20th, approximately 400 soldiers mobbed the State House and demanded their payment. The soldiers blocked the doors and refused to allow anyone to leave. Finally, Alexander Hamilton, a delegate for New York, persuaded the soldiers to allow Congress to leave after they promised to meet the following day, June the 21st, to settle the payment issue. That evening, a small congressional committee led by Hamilton met in secret and wrote a letter to the Pennsylvania Executive Council requesting their protection against the mutineers. Their letter threatened that Congress would be forced to move to a safer location if the Council failed to protect them. Well, the Executive Council refused to step in. And on the morning of June the 21st, the Congressional Committee met with the Pennsylvania Executive Council, including its president, John Dickinson, who had been an officer in the militia, and they met in that State House. This time, the council agreed to consult with the militia commanders. When the Executive Council met the Congress the following day, the council refused to act against the soldiers because they were unsure that the local militiamen would protect Congress from their fellow soldiers. And you see, they were also having trouble getting paid by Congress. There were other reasons for the council's refusal to intervene. The council thought the mutiny could be resolved peacefully. Congress just had to pay the soldiers as they had promised. Then there was the question of power and control. Should a sovereign state, Pennsylvania in this case, be subjugated by the demands of a few members of Congress, especially if those members were not fulfilling their contractual obligation to its own soldiers? The Executive Council thought not. When the Executive Council refused to step in, congressional members concluded that they had to leave for their own safety. They left that same day for Nassau Hall, part of the College of New Jersey in Princeton. and Princeton became the provisional capital of the United States. George Washington learned of the mutiny on June the 24th and sent 1,500 troops to suppress it. Some of the mutineers were arrested, and Congress, now at Nassau Hall, began an investigation into the event. In November 1783, 17 months after the mutiny, Congress moved the capital from Princeton, New Jersey, to Annapolis, Maryland. Exactly a year later, they moved the capital again, this time to Trenton, New Jersey. January 1785, they moved the capital to New York City. In the summer of 1787, Congress met again in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. Now that's where our Constitution of the United States was debated and ratified. It was also during this Constitutional Convention that Pennsylvania's failure to protect the Congress in 1783 led the framers of our Constitution to create a federal district distinct from the states where Congress could provide for its own security. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution gave Congress the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such a district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States. The delegates agreed on New York City as the temporary federal capital until they could decide where this district would be located. In 1790, Congress passed the Residence Act, which created the District of Columbia to be located on the banks of the Potomac River from land belonging to the states of Maryland and Virginia. Robert Morris, a representative from Pennsylvania, convinced the delegates to include a stipulation in the Residence Act that Philadelphia would be the temporary capital for 10 years while the new permanent capital was being built. Congress met, well, not at Independence Hall, but at the two-story building next door, which is now called Congress Hall. Now, Robert Morris and his fellow Philadelphians had a plan. They were going to convince Congress to keep the capital in their city. They built a massive President's House and expanded the size of Congress Hall. But despite their best efforts, Philadelphians failed to convince Congress to modify the Residence Act, and on May 14, 1800, the offices of the federal government officially moved to Washington, D.C. Each year, millions of visitors flocked to Philadelphia to see Independence Hall, Congress Hall, the Liberty Bell, and a reconstructed portion of the President's House. Each time I visit, I can feel the historical importance of the area. Now just think for a minute. If Congress had paid those soldiers, Washington, D.C. would never have existed, and our nation's capital would probably still be in what some people call the cradle of liberty, Philadelphia. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.